I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your haunting host, and you're about to experience this bone-chilling story in today's episode of Mr. Midnight Horror. Today, I've brought you a dark and brutal tale of a werewolf attack that spiraled into something far more sinister, a family curse spanning 3 centuries, a desperate hunt through the Cascade Mountains, and a man forced to choose between damnation and death. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this, or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. I've spent the last 15 years training people how to survive threats most civilians never consider. My name is James Hollister. I'm 42 years old, divorced, running a private security consulting business out of Portland. My clients include corporate executives, law enforcement agencies, and private contractors who need expertise in tactical scenarios and combat preparation. What I do isn't glamorous. It's methodical. It's about understanding threat patterns, reading environments, and knowing how to respond when things go wrong. My only real family consists of 3 dogs: Baron, a muscular pit bull with a scarred muzzle; Diesel, a sleek black Doberman with alert eyes that miss nothing; and Tank, a massive Rottweiler whose body bears the marks of his training. These weren't pets. They were weapons. I'd adopted them from a private trainer named Harold 5 years ago, a man who specialized in protection dogs for security contractors and elite clientele. Harold had trained them extensively in bite work, tracking, and combat scenarios. He'd warned me that these dogs weren't for casual ownership. They needed discipline, routine, and a handler who understood their nature. I understood better than most. That October night, the temperature had dropped to 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Fall in Portland felt like the city itself was dying, everything turning brown, the rain persistent and cold. I'd spent the day conducting a defensive tactics seminar for a private security firm downtown. 8 hours of teaching people how to recognize threats, de-escalate situations, and respond with appropriate force. By the time I'd driven home through the winding streets toward the Columbia River, my body was tired but my mind was sharp. That's how I'd trained myself over the years, to stay alert, even when exhausted. I pulled into my driveway around midnight. The house was dark except for the porch light. My neighbors were far enough away that I couldn't see their homes through the trees. That was one reason I'd bought this place: isolation, privacy. The kind of quiet where you could think, where you could train, where you could live without explaining your lifestyle to people who wouldn't understand it. As I stepped out of my truck, the dogs met me at the gate like they always did. Baron pushed his massive head against my leg. Diesel circled, his claws clicking on the gravel. Tank waited patiently, his tail still, his eyes focused on my face. This was the routine. I'd unlock the side gate, walk them around the property for their evening relief, then bring them inside. But something was different tonight. Baron didn't push against me. He hesitated, his body tense. Diesel wasn't circling. He was staring toward the tree line that bordered my property, the thick woods that stretched behind my house toward the river. Tank stood motionless, his massive frame rigid, the fur along his spine raised. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. The dogs didn't respond. They never did. They were trained for silent work. But I could read their body language. Something had them unsettled. I walked them anyway, watching their behavior closely. Baron moved stiffly, his nose working the ground. Diesel kept his head up, his ears rotating toward the woods. Tank stayed close to me, closer than usual. When we returned inside, I noticed they didn't settle as they normally did. Usually they'd eat and then rest on their beds in the living room, calm and composed. Tonight, they paced. Baron moved to the front window and stared out into the darkness. Diesel returned repeatedly to the back door. Tank lay down but didn't sleep. His eyes stayed open, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. I told myself it was nothing. Animals have their moods. A deer passing through the woods, a neighbor's dog. The changing season affecting their instincts. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, reviewing client files on my laptop. Tomorrow, I had the day off. I needed it. Around 2 in the morning, Baron started to whine. It was a low, continuous sound. Not distressed, but alert. Urgent. I'd never heard him make that noise before. I stood and walked to the front window, pulling back the curtain. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint glow of streetlights 200 yards away at the end of my road. Diesel moved to the back door and pressed his nose against the glass. His breath fogged the window. His body was coiled, ready. This wasn't normal. These were trained protection dogs. They'd been conditioned to remain calm unless they detected a genuine threat. They didn't panic. They didn't whine. They didn't show fear. I went to the bedroom and retrieved my Remington 870 shotgun from the safe. It was loaded with Brennecke slugs, heavy, devastating ammunition designed for stopping large targets. I'd purchased the gun years ago when I first adopted the dogs. In my line of work, you learned quickly that preparation separated the living from the dead. I checked the gun carefully, ensuring it was loaded, then carried it with me as I moved through the house. The dogs watched my movements. They knew the gun. They'd been trained in environments where firearms were present. Their body language suggested they understood what it meant. Nothing moved outside, no shadows. No sounds beyond the occasional wind in the trees and the distant hum of the city. I stood in my living room for an hour, watching, listening, the shotgun resting across my lap. Eventually, the dogs began to settle. Baron stopped whining. Diesel moved away from the door. Tank's eyes finally closed. I returned the gun to the bedroom and climbed into bed around 3:30 in the morning. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, listening to the house, to the wind, to the occasional sound of the dogs shifting their weight in the living room. At 4:15, I heard something that made my blood stop. It was a sound from the woods, a roar or a howl or something between the two. It wasn't the sound of any animal I recognized. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion or a wolf. It was something else entirely. Something wrong. The sound carried a weight to it, a depth that seemed to vibrate through the walls of my house. The dogs erupted. All 3 of them were on their feet instantly, barking and snarling. It wasn't the controlled, alert bark they used for intruders. It was raw aggression, primal fear mixed with rage. Baron threw himself at the back door, his body hitting it hard enough to rattle the frame. Diesel and Tank joined him, the 3 of them creating a wall of sound and fury that filled the entire house. I grabbed the shotgun and left the bedroom. As I moved through the hallway, the back door suddenly exploded inward. The thing that came through wasn't anything I could process immediately. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb light. Its face was wrong. Human and animal blended together in a way that violated every natural law I understood. Its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness of my kitchen. Its teeth were enormous, some extending 3 inches from its upper jaw, and its mouth was already open, already hungry. The creature had come to devour my dogs. What it hadn't known was that my dogs were trained for war. The shotgun was already in my hands as I cleared the hallway. My training took over, muscle memory and instinct combining into pure action. The creature was larger than I'd initially assessed, its body filling the kitchen doorway, its claws scraping against the tile floor. The smell hit me next. Something primal and wrong, A mixture of wet fur, blood, and decay that made my stomach turn. Baron was the first to engage. The pit bull launched himself at the creature's left side, his massive jaws closing around what might have been the creature's shoulder or front leg. The impact should have buckled most animals, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It turned toward Baron with deliberate speed, its arms swinging like a club. The motion was too fast, too powerful. Baron flew across the kitchen, crashing into the cabinet beneath the sink with enough force to splinter the wood. Diesel didn't hesitate. The Doberman was trained for precision work, for targeting specific points on a body. He went for the creature's throat, his sleek frame moving with the calculated efficiency of a ballet dancer performing a choreographed kill. His teeth found flesh. I could see the blood spray even in the dim kitchen light. But the creature's hand came up and closed around Diesel's head like a vice. The sound that followed was wet and final. The Doberman's body went limp. I fired. The shotgun's report was deafening in the enclosed space. The Brennica slug caught the creature in the center of its torso, and the impact spun it half around. For a moment, I thought I'd done it. I thought the threat was over. Then the creature straightened, looked down at the massive wound in its chest, and turned its yellow eyes toward me. It was at this moment, standing in my own kitchen facing something that shouldn't exist, that I realized I was going to have to make a choice. This thing had just killed my Doberman. It had thrown my pit bull across the room like he weighed nothing, and now it was moving toward me with the slow, inevitable pace of something that understood it had already won. Tank came from behind it. The Rottweiler had been circling, using the training that had cost me $30,000 over 5 years. He'd waited for the creature to commit to a target. He'd waited for the perfect moment. Now he struck at the creature's rear leg, not the knee or the ankle, but the hamstring, the vulnerable tendon that would cripple anything that walked on 4 legs or stood on 2. Tank's bite was perfect. His jaws closed, and he twisted with the force of his entire body. The creature screamed. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a combination of rage and agony that seemed to shake the walls themselves. It whirled around, and I saw my opportunity. I racked the shotgun, chambering another round, and fired again. This time the slug caught it in the shoulder, spinning it further. Blood was pouring from multiple wounds now, the cavity in its chest, the shattered leg, and the wound in its shoulder. But it was still moving, still dangerous. Baron was struggling to his feet, shaking his head, blood dripping from his muzzle. His left front leg wasn't moving correctly, broken probably. But he was still trying to engage. The creature turned toward him, and I realized it was going to finish what it had started. I fired a 3rd time, this shot aimed at the creature's head. The slug caught it in the face, and finally, the thing went down. It crashed to the kitchen floor, its body convulsing, its breathing ragged and wet. For 30 seconds there was nothing but silence and the smell of cordite and blood. Then Baron limped toward the creature, still trying to fight, still trying to protect his territory. I grabbed the dog's collar and pulled him back toward the living room. Tank was already backing away, his body rigid, his eyes still locked on the creature as if he expected it to rise again at any moment. I looked back at the creature sprawled across my kitchen floor. It was barely moving now, its breathing shallow and irregular. The wounds were catastrophic. No normal animal could survive injuries like these. But as I watched, something changed. The creature's body began to shift, its form becoming less distinct in the shadows. The fur seemed to recede. The monstrous face began to contract, reshaping itself into something almost human. I took a step closer, my shotgun still raised, and froze. The thing lying on my kitchen floor was no longer a creature. It was a man. The man on my kitchen floor was in his mid-50s, pale and covered in blood. His body was muscular despite his age, the kind of physique that suggested years of physical conditioning. His face was unremarkable, weathered, scarred along the left side, with a broken nose that had healed badly. I didn't recognize him. I'd never seen him before in my life, but he was breathing. I kept the shotgun trained on his chest as I assessed the situation. Diesel was dead. I could see that clearly now. His neck was broken, twisted at an angle that left no room for hope. The Doberman's eyes were still open, still staring at nothing. Baron was limping badly, his front left leg barely functional, but he was alive. Tank had retreated to the corner of the kitchen, his body still tense, still ready to engage if the threat returned. The man's eyes opened. They were brown now, human brown, but there was something in them that remained predatory. He looked at me with an expression that suggested he understood exactly what had just happened, and that he wasn't finished yet. "Don't move," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through my system. "You're already dead. The only question is how dead you want to be when the police arrive." The man coughed. Blood bubbled from his mouth. He tried to sit up, and I saw the effort it took, the way his body resisted the commands his mind was sending. The wound in his chest was deep. The Brennica slug had gone clean through, leaving a cavity the size of my fist. No human should be conscious with an injury like that. "The police," he said, his voice rough and wet. "You think the police will help you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I moved to my landline phone on the counter and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I kept my eyes on the man. He was smiling. Actually smiling. His teeth were stained with blood, and his expression held something between amusement and resignation. The operator answered. I reported an intruder, shots fired. Injuries. I gave my address. The dispatcher asked if the intruder was still a threat. I looked at the man bleeding out on my kitchen floor and said yes. She told me to stay on the line and that officers would be en route. I stayed on the line but didn't speak. I was watching the man. He stopped smiling. His breathing became more labored. His skin took on a waxy gray quality. For a moment I thought he was dying, that the wounds would finally claim him. Then his hand moved. It was a slow gesture, almost lazy, but his fingers fumbled at something on his neck. I saw it then, a pendant, some kind of carved stone hanging from a leather cord. The man's lips moved, and he was saying something, words in a language I didn't recognize, a chant or a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell which. His voice was getting weaker, but the intensity of his recitation was increasing. It was as if he was pushing everything he had left into these final words. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking if I was still there, if I was safe. I didn't answer. I was watching the man's body begin to change again. The transformation wasn't as dramatic as the first one. It was slower, more controlled. His fingers began to lengthen, the nails darkening and thickening. His skin started to take on that same texture as before, fur beginning to emerge from his pores. But it wasn't complete. He was caught between forms, stuck in some grotesque halfway point between human and monster. "What are you?" I asked, even though I knew he might not answer. "Cursed," the man said, his voice now distorted by a mouth that was reshaping itself into something with too many teeth. "My bloodline is cursed. The curse transfers to the strongest hunter who defeats me. That's how it works. That's always how it works." Before I could process what he meant, his body convulsed violently. Blood poured from his mouth, his nose, his eyes. His form collapsed back into the human shape, but the light in his eyes was gone. The man was dead. I stood there, shotgun still raised, phone still pressed to my ear. The dispatcher was asking repeatedly if I was still there, if anyone was hurt, if the threat had been neutralized. I told her yes. I told her the intruder was down and no longer a threat. I told her I had injuries to attend to. Behind me, Baron whined softly. Tank was moving toward the dead man, sniffing at him carefully, as if confirming that the threat was truly over. The kitchen smelled like blood and burnt cordite and something else, something that reminded me of wet earth and copper and things that shouldn't exist. I hung up the phone and immediately went to Baron. His leg was definitely broken, possibly in more than one place. I'd need to get him to a veterinary emergency clinic. Diesel was beyond help. Tank appeared to be mostly uninjured, though I'd need to check him thoroughly once I had more light and less adrenaline clouding my judgment. As I was examining Baron, something occurred to me. The man's words. The curse transfers to the strongest hunter who defeats me. I looked down at my hands. They appeared normal in the dim light. My skin was my skin. No transformation. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window above my sink, something caught my eye. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in my expression. Something yellow and feral and hungry. Then it was gone. I told myself I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Outside in the distance I could hear sirens approaching through the Portland streets. Blue and red lights began to flicker across my kitchen walls, painting the scene in alternating colors. Blood, death, and a mystery that had just begun. The Portland Police Department arrived in force. 2 patrol cars, lights blazing, officers moving with the cautious efficiency of people trained to expect anything. The first officer through the door had his weapon drawn, his partner covering him from the porch. When they saw the body on my kitchen floor and the blood splatter across my walls, their expression shifted from alert to something more complicated. I'd already secured the shotgun and was sitting in my living room with Baron, one hand on the dog's neck, keeping him calm. Tank was in the hallway, watching everything. The officers called for backup and for a detective. One of them, a woman named Officer Reeves, took my initial statement while her partner secured the scene. I told her a man had broken into my house, attempted to attack my dogs, and I defended myself with lethal force. It was the truth. It was also incomplete, but I wasn't ready to explain things I didn't understand to people who would never believe me anyway. By the time Detective Raymond arrived, my house had been transformed into a crime scene. Forensic technicians were photographing the body, the blood patterns, the broken back door. A veterinary emergency clinic had sent an ambulance for Baron, and they'd taken Diesel's body as well. I watched them place my Doberman in a body bag with a detachment that surprised me. I should have felt more. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A cold, predatory satisfaction that the threat had been eliminated. It was unsettling, that feeling. It was also undeniable. Detective Raymond was in his 60s, with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, a notebook in his hands, a voice recorder between us. He'd already read me my rights, though I wasn't technically under arrest. Yet. "Tell me about the man," he said, his voice neutral. "I don't know who he is," I replied. "I've never seen him before tonight." "He broke into your home at 4 in the morning, attacked your dogs, and you happen to have a loaded shotgun within arm's reach." "I keep it loaded. I live alone. I work in security. It's standard practice." Raymond wrote something in his notebook. 3 shots, all fatal or nearly fatal. That's impressive shooting in a dark kitchen during a confrontation. "I'm trained for this." "Trained by whom?" "Various organizations, military advisory work in the past, private contractor positions. Now I run my own security consulting business." Raymond's eyes narrowed slightly. He was the kind of detective who'd seen enough lies to recognize when someone was telling the partial truth. The man on your floor. We're running his prints now, but nothing's come up in any system we have access to. No ID on him, no wallet, no phone, just a pendant. At this, I felt something shift in my chest. What kind of pendant? Some kind of carved stone. Looks ancient, maybe. We've got it bagged as evidence. He leaned forward. You know what's strange, Hollister? The coroner's preliminary assessment is that this man should have been dead from the first shot. The wound in his chest went clean through his heart. There's no medical reason he should have been conscious, much less mobile, after that kind of injury. I didn't respond. I couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't sound insane. The second shot hit his shoulder and shattered the humerus. The third shot was a headshot that should have ended things immediately. But the coroner says the head wound came last after he was already dead. How do you account for that? I was firing in sequence. I kept shooting until he went down. That's not what the forensic evidence suggests. It suggests you fired 3 times, and the last shot was almost clinical in its precision. A point-blank shot to the head after the man was already incapacitated. I met his gaze steadily. He killed my dog. I made sure he couldn't get back up. Raymond studied me for a long moment. Then he leaned back and closed his notebook. Your story checks out as far as it goes. Self-defense. The man broke into your home. He attacked your animals. You used appropriate force. But there's something about this whole situation that doesn't sit right with me. Something that feels incomplete. I've told you everything I know. Have you? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the forest behind my house. There's no evidence of how he got here. No vehicle nearby, no tracks that go anywhere. It's as if he just appeared in your backyard. He turned back to face me. In my 30 years of detective work, I've learned that the world is stranger than most people realize. And sometimes, the truth is worse than any lie. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that whatever happened here tonight, it's not over. The man on your floor was looking for something, or someone. And now that he's dead, something is going to change. Something is going to respond to his death. Raymond moved toward the door, then paused. Do you have somewhere you can go? Someone you can stay with? Why would I need to leave my own home? Because I think you're in danger, Hollister, and I think you know more about why than you're telling me. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen. The forensic team was still working, but they were quiet, professional, efficient. I watched them document the scene and wondered what they would find. I wondered if the body would remain unchanged, or if it would transform again, revealing the truth to people who had no framework for understanding it. Around dawn, as the sun was beginning to rise over Portland, I noticed something I'd missed before. On the pendant that Detective Raymond had bagged as evidence, visible through the plastic, was a symbol I recognized. I'd seen similar markings before, years ago, during a training assignment in rural Mexico. A symbol associated with a curse. A symbol that meant only one thing. The curse hadn't died with the man on my kitchen floor. It had transferred to me. I left Portland that same morning. The police cleared me by 10 o'clock. Detective Raymond had pulled some strings. Or maybe he'd simply accepted that my story was consistent, and the evidence supported self-defense. Before I left, he handed me a card, and told me to call if anything else unusual happened. I took the card and didn't mention the pendant or the curse or any of the things that were already beginning to feel very real. Barron was at the emergency veterinary clinic with a fractured tibia and fibula. The vet said he'd need surgery, followed by 8 to 12 weeks of recovery. I paid the bill without hesitation and arranged for the clinic to keep him while I figured out what I was going to do. I couldn't take him with me. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening to me. Tank stayed with me. The Rottweiler seemed to sense that something was wrong. He followed me from room to room as I packed a bag with clothes, cash, and my laptop. I didn't pack the shotgun. I wasn't sure if it would help or if weapons even mattered anymore. How do you fight something that exists in your own blood? I drove east out of Portland, heading toward the Cascade Mountains. The day was cold and gray, the kind of November weather that made the landscape feel lifeless and hostile. I stopped in a small town called Troutdale, about 20 miles from the city, and checked into a motel. The clerk didn't ask questions. I paid cash for a week and was given a room on the ground floor, far from the office. That night, around midnight, I felt it beginning. It started as a tingling in my fingertips, a sensation like electricity running through my nerves. Then it spread up my arms, across my chest, down my legs. My skin felt too tight, as if my body was trying to become something else, and my current form couldn't accommodate it. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were changing. The brown was becoming flecked with yellow, and the yellow was spreading, consuming the brown, replacing it with something animal and ancient. My teeth felt different in my mouth, longer, sharper, pressing against my gums as they grew. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edges of the sink and tried to breathe. The pain came next. It wasn't like any pain I'd experienced before. It wasn't the sharp sting of a wound or the dull ache of an injury. It was a deep, fundamental agony that seemed to originate from my very cells, as if my body was rebelling against itself, trying to reorganize into a new configuration, while every atom screamed in protest. I fell to the floor of the bathroom. Tank, hearing me cry out, scratched at the motel room door. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him I was fine, but I couldn't speak. My mouth was reshaping itself. My jaw was extending, my face becoming something that existed between human and predator. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I looked up at the bathroom mirror again. I was human, completely, entirely human. My eyes were brown, my teeth were normal, my hands were unchanged. The transformation had halted midway through its progression, leaving me caught between forms but appearing entirely human. I staggered out of the bathroom and collapsed on the bed. Tank immediately jumped up beside me, his massive body providing warmth and comfort. I wrapped my arms around the dog and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Over the next 3 days, I experienced the transformation 4 more times. Each time was slightly different. The first time, my entire body had shifted into the creature form, and I'd felt a surge of hunger so intense it was almost unbearable. I'd wanted to hunt. I'd wanted to kill. Tank had been in the room with me, and I remembered looking at him, seeing him as prey, feeling the overwhelming urge to attack. But then something held me back. Some part of me, some last fragment of James Hollister, had reasserted control and forced the transformation back into my human form. The other transformations were less complete, partial shifts where only certain aspects of the creature would manifest. My voice would change, becoming deep and resonant. My strength would increase exponentially. I broke the bathroom sink by leaning on it too hard. My sense of smell became so acute I could detect the fear scent of other guests in rooms adjacent to mine. By the 4th day, I understood what was happening. The curse was integrating into my biology. It wasn't fighting my human body anymore. Instead, it was weaving itself into my DNA, becoming part of me, making me something that was neither fully human nor fully the creature I'd killed. I needed answers. I needed to understand what the man in my kitchen had been, what the curse actually was, and whether there was any way to stop the transformation, or at least control it. I opened my laptop and began researching. The symbol on the pendant had been Portuguese. I was almost certain of it. The man had spoken words in a language I didn't recognize, but there had been a South American cadence to it. I started searching for information about curses in Brazilian folklore. What I found was a legend about a creature called the lobisomem, a werewolf of sorts but with specific rules and traditions. According to the folklore, the lobisomem was traditionally the seventh son of a seventh son, cursed to transform on full moons and hunt humans. But there was another version of the legend, one that appeared less frequently in the sources I found. This version suggested that the curse wasn't inherited, it was transferred. A hunter who defeated a lobisomem would inherit the curse. The transformation would begin immediately and would take control of the host within a lunar cycle. Once a full moon passed with the curse active in a new host, the transformation would become permanent. The hunter would become the hunted, and the cycle would continue until someone stronger came along to defeat them. I checked the calendar. The last full moon had been 6 days ago. The next one was in 23 days. I had less than 4 weeks to find a way to break the curse or accept what I was becoming. As I closed my laptop, Tank began to growl. The sound started low in his chest and built into something threatening. He was staring at the motel room window, his body rigid, his hackles raised. I moved to the window and looked out into the darkness of the motel parking lot. In the shadows between the streetlights, I saw movement. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with an unnatural gait. And then another figure, and another. They were circling the motel, circling my room, moving with purpose and intelligence. They were hunting me. I grabbed my bag and the car keys without hesitation. There was no time to think, no time to formulate a plan. The figures in the parking lot were moving faster now, converging on the motel. Tank was at the door, still growling, his body language suggesting he wanted to engage. I grabbed his collar and pulled him toward the back of the motel. The room had a rear exit that led to a maintenance area, and then the tree line beyond. I pushed through the door and ran, Tank moving alongside me, the Rottweiler's powerful frame matching my pace stride for stride. Behind us, I heard the sound of the motel room door being kicked in. They were coming. They were already inside. The forest was dark and thick with undergrowth. I didn't know these woods. Didn't have any sense of direction beyond the general eastward heading I'd been traveling. But I moved through the trees with a speed and grace that surprised me. My new body, the cursed body, was stronger, faster, more agile than anything I'd been before my combat training. It was as if my muscles had been upgraded, my nervous system enhanced, my reflexes sharpened to a predatory edge. Behind us, I could hear them pursuing. They were crashing through the forest with less finesse than I had, but their determination was absolute. I caught glimpses of them in the moonlight between the trees. Large, muscular forms that moved with the same unsettling gait I'd seen in the parking lot. They weren't fully transformed, but they weren't entirely human either. They were caught in a state between, just as I had been. Tank suddenly veered to the left, pulling at his collar, trying to redirect me. I followed the dog's instinct. Rottweilers had been bred for tracking and trailing. Tank was responding to something I couldn't perceive. We ran down a slope, through a ravine, and suddenly I could hear the sound of water. A river, rushing and fast, invisible in the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Tank and jumped. The water was cold enough to shock my system. The current was stronger than I'd anticipated, pulling at my legs, trying to drag me downstream. But I held tight to Tank and fought for the opposite bank. Behind us, I heard the hunters reach the riverbank and stop. They didn't follow. Whether it was because they couldn't swim or because they chose not to risk the current, I didn't know. But they stood there in the darkness, watching as Tank and I pulled ourselves onto the far bank, gasping and soaked. We ran until my lungs felt like fire. We ran until the sounds of pursuit faded. We ran until the first gray light of dawn began to break through the trees. Only then did I allow myself to stop, collapsing against the trunk of a massive Douglas fir, my breathing ragged and heavy. Tank collapsed beside me, his tongue hanging out, his body trembling with exertion. I wrapped my arm around the dog and tried to process what had just happened. The hunters had known where I was. They'd known which motel room I was in. They'd coordinated their attack with precision and purpose. Someone had sent them. I stumbled toward a small stream I could hear nearby and drank deeply, then soaked my shirt and used it to clean the river water and mud from my face. My reflection in the shallow water showed my face half transformed, one eye brown, one eye yellow. My teeth were extended, pressing against my lower lip. My skin was taking on a grayish tone. The transformation was accelerating. I needed to think clearly about my options. I couldn't go to the police. How would I explain any of this? I couldn't go back to my house. They would be watching for me there. I couldn't use my credit cards or my phone. Both could be tracked. What I could do was disappear. I had cash, I had Tank, and I had a set of skills that had been refined over 15 years of security work. The question was, who had sent those hunters, and why did they want me dead? The answer came to me as I was checking my bag for supplies. Inside the bag, tucked beneath a pair of socks, was something I didn't remember packing. It was a photograph. The image showed a group of men standing in front of a building I recognized, an old warehouse in the Portland Industrial District. One of the men in the photograph was the man I'd killed in my kitchen. The other 4 men were smiling for the camera, their arms around each other like brothers in a fraternity. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single word in Portuguese. Família. Family. I understood then. The lobisomem, the man I'd killed, wasn't just a random creature. He was part of something organized, part of a group. And by killing him, I'd violated a code that extended far beyond a single curse. I looked at Tank and then at the forest around us. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the trees in shades of gold and orange. It was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, as if nature itself was aware of the predator in its midst and was holding its breath. "We need to move," I said to Tank, my voice coming out deeper than it should, with a rasp that suggested my vocal cords were still in the process of transforming. "We need to get to higher ground, find shelter, figure out who they are, and what they want." Tank pushed himself to his feet, and together we began moving deeper into the forest. Behind us, miles away, the hunters were regrouping. And ahead of us, somewhere in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, the answer to the mystery of the lobisomem family was waiting. What I didn't know was that the answer would cost me everything. 3 days in the wilderness taught me more about survival than 15 years of training ever had. Not because the skills were new. I'd been trained in wilderness navigation, shelter construction, and resource management, but because now I was prey. Everything changed when you understood that people wanted you dead. Tank and I moved higher into the Cascade Mountains, staying away from roads and trails. The transformation was becoming more frequent now. I could feel it lurking beneath my skin, waiting for moments of stress or anger to pull free. Each time it happened, it hurt less. Each time it happened, I felt less like myself and more like the creature. On the second night, I caught a deer. I didn't remember deciding to hunt it. One moment I was moving through a forest clearing, and the next moment, my body was in full predator mode. The transformation was only partial. My upper body remained mostly human, but my legs had changed, my arms had lengthened, and my teeth were fully extended. The deer didn't stand a chance. The worst part wasn't the kill. It was how good it felt. The taste of blood, the warmth of fresh meat, the satisfaction of a successful hunt. I ate more than half the carcass before my human mind reasserted control, and I forced myself to stop. Tank didn't judge me. The Rottweiler had eaten alongside me, his predatory instincts aligned with my own. Afterward, I sat by a small stream and cried. Not from sadness, but from fear. The curse was consuming me faster than I'd anticipated. At this rate, I'd be fully transformed well before the full moon arrived. On the morning of the fourth day, I heard voices. Tank alerted first, his ears perking up, his body going rigid. I moved silently through the dense underbrush toward the sound. What I found was a camp, a small clearing where 3 men were setting up equipment. They had rifles, tactical gear, and a camping setup that suggested they were prepared for an extended operation. These weren't casual hikers. I recognized one of them from the photograph. His name was Daniel Ferreira, and according to the information I'd found online before leaving the motel, he ran a private security firm based in Seattle. What I hadn't found online was any connection to the Lobisomum or to the man I'd killed in my kitchen. The other 2 men were unfamiliar to me, but they moved with the same kind of trained coordination that Ferreira displayed. They were discussing their search pattern, talking about the target in a detached professional manner. They had dogs with them, 2 German shepherds wearing tactical vests, search and rescue dogs, or more likely, tracking and hunting dogs. I watched them for an hour, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their capabilities. Ferreira seemed to be in charge. The other 2 deferred to him. The dogs were well trained, but not combat trained. They were hunters, trackers, but not fighters like Tank. As I was assessing the situation, my phone buzzed. I'd kept the phone on, buried in my bag, with the location services disabled. I'd told myself I needed to check for messages, to understand what was happening in the world beyond the forest. The truth was, I'd kept it because part of me still wanted to maintain a connection to my old life. The message was from Detective Raymond. We found more bodies. 3 of them. In the woods near where you were staying. Same injuries as the man in your kitchen. Same transformation signs. Hollister, I don't know what's happening, but you're in the middle of something bigger than I thought. Call me. The message had come through 2 hours ago. 3 more bodies. That meant there were at least 3 more cursed individuals operating in the region. Or it meant something else entirely. It meant there was a war being waged, and I'd walked into the middle of it by killing one of the combatants. Below the message from Raymond were 3 more messages, all from an unknown number. The first read, "You took something that belonged to us. Correction, you took someone. We're coming for you." The second, "The curse will consume you. You'll be fully transformed within days. When you are, you'll understand what you've become. You'll understand what we are." The third, "Run as long as you want, James Hollister. The family always collects what's owed." I deleted the messages and turned off the phone, but I understood what was happening now. The Lobisomum I'd killed wasn't just a hunter or a rogue predator. He was part of an organized network. And they wanted me because I carried their curse. They wanted me because I represented a threat or an asset. I still wasn't sure which. Tank nudged my leg, pulling my attention back to the present. The 3 men in the clearing were packing up their camp. They were moving, heading north, deeper into the mountains. I made a decision in that moment, a decision that would either save my life or end it. I was going to follow them. And when the opportunity presented itself, I was going to get answers. I waited until they were moving before I followed. Tank moved alongside me, the Rottweiler's massive frame flowing through the forest with practiced silence. We tracked them for 8 miles, staying just out of sight, using the forest to our advantage. The German shepherds caught our scent twice, but I kept us downwind and moving too fast for them to lock onto a solid trail. Around sunset, we reached a road. It was a service road, the kind used by rangers and maintenance crews to access remote areas. A truck was parked there, a heavy-duty Ford F-350 with extended cab and a custom bed. The men were preparing to load their equipment. That was when I saw him. The man climbing down from the driver's seat of the truck was someone I recognized immediately, even though I'd never seen him in person before. His face was burned into my memory from the photograph and the research I'd done. His name was Marcus. No, wait. That name was already used. His name was Victor Ferreira. Daniel's brother. He looked older than Daniel, probably in his early 60s. His face was scarred, one eye milky white from an old injury. But his presence commanded absolute authority. The moment he emerged from the truck, all three men straightened, their body language shifting into something more respectful, more careful. Victor looked directly at the spot where Tank and I were hidden in the trees. "Come out, James Hollister," he called. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "We have much to discuss." I didn't move. I didn't reveal myself. But my hand went to the knife I was carrying, a tool I'd taken from the motel room. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Victor smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "You killed my grandson," he said. "The curse has taken root in your blood. In exactly 19 days, you will transform completely. When you do, you will understand what you've become, and you will have a choice to make." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Join us, and we will teach you to control the beast. Refuse, and we will hunt you until there is nothing left of either James Hollister or the creature you're becoming." I stepped out of the forest with Tank at my side. There was no point in hiding anymore. They knew where I was. They'd been herding me toward this moment since the moment I'd killed Victor's grandson in my kitchen. Victor Ferreira studied me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His one good eye was sharp, calculating, assessing. The other eye, the milky white one, never moved, fixed on some point in the distance, as if it was seeing something the rest of us couldn't perceive. "You're transforming faster than anticipated," Victor said, walking toward me with no apparent concern that I might attack. "That's the Doberman's influence. Your dog killed my grandson's companion in the fight. The beast respects that. The beast wants to honor it." "Your grandson tried to kill my dogs," I said. My voice was distorted, caught between human speech and something deeper and more primal. "He broke into my home." "He did," Victor acknowledged. He stopped about 15 feet away from me, close enough to be threatening but far enough to react if I lunged. "He did that because the curse demanded it. The lobisomum is drawn to strong predators, to warriors. Your dogs are warriors. My grandson was drawn to them. He wanted to test himself against them. He wanted to claim them for his own pack. He's dead because he failed." Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his good eye. "Yes, he failed. And you inherited what was his. The curse of the Ferreira family. A curse that has existed for 300 years, passed from father to son, from hunter to hunter, for longer than the United States has existed as a nation." The three men who'd been setting up camp were now standing in a line behind Victor, their hands visible but not quite threatening. The German shepherds were being held by Daniel Ferreira, straining against their leashes but not attacking. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "What I said before. A choice. You can come with us. We have facilities where we can train you, teach you to control the transformation, teach you the rules that govern the family. We are not monsters, James Hollister. We are something far more complex than that. We are a lineage. We are tradition. We are survival." Tank growled, a low rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the forest itself. Tank knew danger when he sensed it. Tank understood that nothing Victor was offering was genuine. "And if I refuse? Then we will hunt you. We will drive you into the mountains, into the desert, across the country if necessary. We will pursue you until you either transform completely and join us out of necessity, or until you're dead. The choice is yours, but the outcome is inevitable either way. I looked at Victor's scarred face, at his milky eye, at the careful way he was watching me. I could see the history of violence in that face. I could see decades of hunting, of killing, of surviving. And I understood that he meant what he was saying. This wasn't a bluff. This was a statement of absolute fact. "I need time," I said. "You have 19 days before the full moon. After that, you're either with us or you're dead. The transformation will be complete, and you'll need to hunt. When you need to hunt, you'll either hunt with us or you'll hunt alone. Hunting alone is how predators die." Victor turned and walked back toward the truck. The other men followed. Daniel Ferreira released the German shepherds, and they circled me and Tank, sniffing, assessing, but not attacking. They seemed to recognize that Tank was not a normal dog, that something about him commanded their respect despite him being outnumbered. "We'll be watching," Victor called over his shoulder as he climbed back into the truck. "Don't do anything foolish, James Hollister. The family is patient, but our patience has limits." The truck started. The three men climbed into the vehicle, and then they were driving away, leaving me and Tank alone on the service road in the fading light of the Oregon mountains. I stood there for a long time after they'd gone, trying to process what had just happened. I'd expected violence. I'd expected to have to fight for my life. Instead, I'd been offered a choice. It was a false choice. A choice between two forms of servitude. But it was still a choice. Tank pressed against my leg, and I realized the dog was shaking. The Rottweiler, normally so composed and controlled, was terrified. Tank understood what I was only beginning to grasp. We were trapped. There was no escape. There was only the slow progression toward a transformation that would consume everything I was and replace it with something else. I checked my phone. No signal out here, but I could still access the messages. I scrolled through everything Victor had sent, everything the unknown numbers had sent, looking for something, anything, that might indicate another way out of this situation. There was nothing. What I did find was an old message from Detective Raymond, sent 3 days earlier. "I've been investigating the man in your kitchen. His name is Michael Ferreira. Born in Brazil, 37 years old. Multiple aliases. Connected to organized crime in 3 countries. But here's what's interesting. He's connected to a network of individuals with similar profiles. People who appear in photographs decades apart, who don't seem to age, who are connected by something I can't quite define. Whatever you're involved in, Hollister, it's bigger than murder. It's bigger than crime. I think you should come in and tell me everything." I deleted the message and powered off the phone. Coming in. Telling Raymond everything. None of that would help. How do you explain a 300-year-old curse to a detective? How do you make someone understand that the only choices available to you are damnation or death? Tank and I walked through the night, heading deeper into the mountains. I needed time to think. I needed to understand what I was becoming and whether there was any way to fight it. Most of all, I needed to figure out if there was a third option, one that Victor hadn't mentioned and that the family hadn't anticipated. As we walked, I felt the curse moving through my body again, closer to the surface than ever before. My fingernails were hardening into claws. My teeth were reshaping themselves into something more dangerous. My muscles were growing denser, stronger, more efficient. 19 days remained until the full moon. 19 days until I would either join the Ferreira family or cease to exist. But as I walked through the darkness with Tank at my side, I began to formulate a plan. It was a plan born of desperation and rage, a plan that probably wouldn't work, a plan that would likely get me killed. But it was a plan nonetheless, and it was the only one I had. If the Ferreira family wanted to hunt me, then I would give them something to hunt. I would give them a predator that was more dangerous than anything they'd ever encountered. And I would do it before the full moon arrived, before the transformation consumed the last remnants of James Hollister. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and the hunted was about to become something far worse than either. I spent the next 18 days preparing for war. Tank and I established a base camp in a remote area of the Cascade Mountains, approximately 40 miles from the nearest town. The location was chosen carefully: high elevation, multiple escape routes, water source nearby, and dense forest cover that would make aerial surveillance nearly impossible. I used the cash I'd brought to purchase supplies from small towns, always paying in person, always moving locations every 2 to 3 days to avoid establishing a pattern. The transformation accelerated with each passing day. By day 5, I could maintain a partial shift for hours at a time. By day 10, the partial shift was becoming easier than remaining fully human. My body was adapting to the curse, integrating it into my cellular structure, making it a fundamental part of who I was, rather than something imposed upon me. I stopped trying to resist it. Instead, I trained with it. I learned how to move in the creature form, how to maximize the strength and speed it provided. I discovered that my sense of smell was so acute, I could track a human scent across miles of forest. I learned that my hearing could detect heartbeats from over 100 yards away. I learned that the creature form had reflexes that made my combat training look primitive by comparison. Tank adapted alongside me. The Rottweiler's own instincts seemed to unlock in the presence of my transformation. We began to hunt together: deer, elk, wild boar, learning to coordinate our attacks, learning to work as a unit. The violence was primal and necessary. Each kill was a lesson in predatory efficiency. On day 12, Victor Ferreira's men found me. They came with weapons, rifles with thermal scopes, tranquilizer darts, and enough equipment to suggest they'd been hunting large predators for years. There were 5 of them this time, including Daniel, and 2 new faces I didn't recognize. Tank alerted me to their presence hours before they arrived, and I was waiting when they entered my camp. The first man to emerge from the trees was met with a force he couldn't have anticipated. Tank hit him from the side, the Rottweiler's 200-pound frame colliding with the hunter's body and driving him to the ground. The man's rifle went flying. Tank's teeth closed around his arm, and the man screamed. I was already in motion, fully transformed now, my body a weapon of pure predatory intent. The second hunter got off 2 shots before I reached him. Both shots missed. By the time I was close enough to do damage, his survival instinct had taken over and he was running. I let him run. He would deliver a message to Victor far more effective than any words I could speak. The remaining 3 hunters coordinated their attack. They were professionals, trained to work as a unit, trained to exploit weaknesses. But they'd never trained against something that could smell their fear sweat through 3 layers of clothing. Something that could move faster than human eyes could track. Something that had spent 18 days learning to be a predator. The fight lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, 2 of the hunters were dead. The third had managed to flee into the forest, his leg badly injured, his survival uncertain. Tank and I didn't pursue him. We let him escape, just as we'd let the other one escape. Victor needed to know what we were becoming. Victor needed to understand that the family had made a mistake by underestimating their new member. I found their camp a mile away and burned it to the ground. Supplies, equipment, vehicles, everything went up in flames. I left the bodies of the 2 dead hunters arranged deliberately in the center of the burning camp, positioned in a way that would be unmistakable. A declaration of war. That night, I received a call on a burner phone I'd purchased. The number was Victor's. "You're making a mistake," Victor said without preamble. The family doesn't tolerate rebellion. The family doesn't tolerate betrayal. Your grandson came to my house and tried to take my dogs, I replied. My voice was still partially transformed, but intelligible. I defended what was mine. I didn't start this war, Victor. I'm just finishing it. You're one person against a family with 300 years of history. You're nothing. A child playing with forces you don't understand. Maybe. But I'm a child with nothing left to lose. And I'm very good at what I do. I hung up the phone and destroyed it. The next 6 days were a blur of movement and violence. Victor's family came at me repeatedly. Small teams, large teams, hunters working alone. None of them expected to face a Lobisomum who was fully in control of the transformation, who had a trained combat dog at his side, and who had 18 days of hunting experience compressed into an intense period of learning. I killed 14 of them. The others retreated. By day 18, Victor's hunting parties had stopped coming. The radio silence suggested one of two things. Either the family was regrouping for a major assault, or Victor was reconsidering his approach. I suspected it was both. On the 19th day, the day before the full moon, Victor came to me himself. He arrived at my camp alone, walking slowly through the forest with his hands visible and empty. He was older than I'd realized, his scarred face showing the weight of centuries of violence and responsibility. Behind him, at a distance, I could sense his remaining family members, holding back, allowing this final confrontation to happen in private. "You're stronger than I anticipated," Victor said, stopping a respectful distance from where I stood. Tank was at my side, the Rottweiler's body tense, but not aggressive. "You've integrated the curse faster than any Lobisomum in family history. Most take months to achieve what you've done in weeks." "I had good motivation," I said. "Yes, you did." Victor studied me carefully. "Tomorrow the full moon rises. The final transformation will occur. You'll become fully Lobisomum, and the human portion of your consciousness will be submerged beneath the predator's instinct. Unless—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Unless what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Unless you choose to remain in control. The family has a ritual, an ancient blood ceremony that allows a Lobisomum to retain consciousness through the full moon transformation. It's a painful process, and only the strongest survive it. But if you survive, you'll retain your humanity. You'll remain James Hollister, but you'll also be fully Lobisomum. And if I go through this ceremony, I have to join the family. Yes, you would become one of us. You would hunt with us, live by our rules, accept our authority. But you would also survive. You would have a future beyond the next 24 hours. I looked at Victor, and I understood the choice he was offering. It was the choice he'd offered before, but now it came with a different context. Now I'd proven myself. Now I was valuable. Now I was worth recruiting instead of destroying. "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Tomorrow night you transform completely. The predator takes over entirely. You become a beast, James Hollister. You'll hunt, you'll kill, you'll destroy everything in your path, and within a week, someone from the family will put you down like the animal you'll have become. It's not a pleasant way to die." I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "I need to think about it." Victor nodded slowly. "You have until sunset. After that, the full moon rises, and your choice becomes irrelevant." He turned and walked back into the forest, his family members falling into step behind him. They melted into the darkness, leaving me and Tank alone with the weight of the decision before us. As the sun descended toward the horizon, I climbed to the highest point in the area and looked out over the mountains. The landscape was beautiful in a way that felt almost painful now, every detail sharp and clear in my enhanced vision, every sound distinct and meaningful. I could hear the heartbeats of animals miles away. I could smell the approaching storm front from over 100 miles distant. I could feel the curse moving through my body, preparing for the final transformation. Tank pressed against my leg, and I placed my hand on the dog's head. Tank had chosen to stay with me. Tank had chosen to hunt alongside me. Tank had chosen to accept what I was becoming. In his simple, direct way, Tank had already made the choice for both of us. As the sun touched the horizon, I made my way back down the mountain toward where Victor's family was waiting. I could see their fires in the distance, flickering points of light in the darkness. Behind me, Tank matched my pace, his breathing steady, his focus absolute. By the time I reached Victor's camp, the sun had set completely. The full moon was rising over the mountains, huge and luminous and terrible. I could feel it pulling at me, feel the curse responding to its ancient call. I stopped at the edge of the firelight and waited. Victor emerged from the shadows. He was holding something in his hands, a knife, ancient and ceremonial, with runes carved along its blade. Behind him stood his remaining family members, perhaps 20 strong, representing centuries of predatory lineage. "Have you made your choice?" Victor asked. I looked at the knife, at Victor, at the family gathered around us. I looked back at Tank, who was watching me with absolute trust and loyalty. And then I smiled. A smile that showed teeth that were no longer entirely human. "Yes," I said. "I have." The final transformation began as the moon rose higher into the sky. The pain was excruciating, but I welcomed it. The curse was completing its work, integrating itself fully into every cell of my body. But unlike Victor expected, like the family anticipated, I didn't lose myself in the transformation. I remained conscious. I remained James Hollister, security consultant and combat trainer. But I was also something else now, something far older and far more dangerous. When the transformation was complete, Victor smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Welcome to the family," he said. But as I stood there under the full moon, fully lobisomum but still fundamentally human, I made a silent promise to myself. I would use this power differently than the family intended. I would use it to protect, not to hunt. I would use it to save, not to destroy. And when the time came to face the family's true nature, when I understood what they were really doing with their centuries of power, I would be ready to stop them. The curse had found a new host, but the host had plans of his own. James Hollister's transformation in the mountains of Oregon is a chilling testament to the price of survival, when victory comes at the cost of your own humanity. The curse of the Ferreira family is far from over, and James now walks between two worlds, neither fully human nor completely beast. Like this video, if you felt the terror of the hunt, comment below. Would you have joined the family or would you have fought to the end? Share this story with someone who needs to know that some legends are real, some curses are hereditary, and some hunters become the hunted. And if you're courageous enough, subscribe to IMSAR Midnight Horror and activate the notification bell. That way, you'll always have a guide through the darkest corners of reality, where ancient evils still draw breath.